The courtroom erupted into a tense silence the moment the gavel struck. $500 million. $500 million. The number hovered in the air like a storm cloud, impossible to ignore, impossible to believe. Jasmine Crockett stood at the center, her expression calm, unwavering, as if the weight of the world balanced perfectly on her shoulders. Around her, whispers rippled like wildfire, reporters raising their phones, lens clicking, social media feeds lighting up in real time. Every eye in the room was locked on her, every ear attuned to the faint scratch of the gavel, every heartbeat synchronizing with the magnitude of the moment. Judge Thomas, towering in his robe and bearing the authority of decades on the bench, looked down from his seat. His usual air of arrogance faltered for just a fraction of a second, a crack in the armor that no one could miss. He had levied the astronomical fine, believing it would crush her, believing it would intimidate, silence, and humiliate. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She did not stammer. She did not bow. Instead, she lifted her chin, her eyes locking with his, and a calm strength radiated from her that filled the room like a tidal wave. Outside the courthouse, the world erupted in real-time reactions. Headlines flashed. Crockett faces $500 million fine, or does she? Judge Thomas humiliated on national stage. Hashtags trended in seconds. Crockett unstoppable. Justice or Showdown. Gavel shock. Tweets poured in, each one more incredulous than the last, the public collectively holding its breath, unable to turn away. Memes began forming before the ink was dry on the court transcripts, framing her as the unlikely hero, defying power with dignity and poise. In that charged moment, the line between courtroom procedure and national spectacle blurred. Cameras panned across a captivated audience. Every gasp, every intake of breath amplified the intensity. The judges, lawyers, journalists, and onlookers all felt it, the sense that this was more than a legal proceeding. This was a reckoning. This was a test of courage under fire. And yet, even as her calm defiance set the room ablaze, no one could foresee the next move. Every mind in that courtroom and across the country wondered the same thing. How could one person stand so unshakably against a tidal wave of power? But what happened next would leave the legal world and the entire country in disbelief. The courtroom had not always been a stage for spectacle. For years, Judge Thomas had built a reputation on ironclad rulings, a career defined by authority and unchallenged influence. He commanded respect or fear, depending on who told the story. Every gavel strike, every sentence delivered, reinforced a narrative of power that few dared question. Yet Jasmine Crockett had been quietly dismantling that narrative for months. The case at hand was not merely a dispute over contracts, fines, or procedural technicalities. It was a test of principle, a clash between entrenched authority and unwavering moral courage. The stakes were monumental. For Thomas, a public loss would tarnish decades of work, erode credibility, and ignite a wave of criticism that would follow him well beyond the courthouse walls. His legacy, meticulously crafted, rested on the perception of control, of infallibility. One misstep could unravel the image of the untouchable judge, and in that instant, the foundations of power he had built would crack before an audience of millions. Every move, every word, every subtle gesture mattered. One misjudged glance, one tremor of hesitation, and the illusion of control could collapse spectacularly. For Crockett, the stakes were no less intense but different in nature. She had poured her life into defending the marginalized, navigating a labyrinthine legal system stacked against those without influence. A loss could have meant financial ruin, professional damage, and a public narrative that cast her as overreaching, naive, or reckless. But victory, she knew, would not simply be personal triumph. It would be symbolic. It would demonstrate that integrity, preparation, and courage could confront and even topple decades of institutional power. Every argument she made, every objection she raised, carried the weight of representation far beyond her own case. America was watching. News networks framed it as more than a court proceeding. It was a battle between morality and authority, a real-time drama unfolding with all the suspense of a high-stakes thriller. Social media amplified every whisper, every gavel strike, and every exchange between lawyer and judge. Ordinary citizens debated fiercely online, taking sides, dissecting strategies, and weighing the ethical implications. The narrative had moved beyond the courtroom and into the collective conscience. Justice itself seemed to hang in the balance, the moral compass of the nation momentarily centered on this single confrontation. The tension between Thomas and Crockett was palpable. Every glare, every carefully measured pause spoke volumes. The courtroom became a theater of contrasts: arrogance versus humility, power versus principle, complacency versus courage. Each observer, from journalists to spectators, felt the electric current of anticipation. Something unprecedented was about to unfold, a moment that would be dissected, remembered, and discussed long after the gavel came down. Hints of the impending showdown flickered in every glance, in every murmur, in the rising wave of expectation that filled the courtroom. This was no ordinary legal dispute. This was a moral spectacle, a collision of worlds that demanded attention and reflection. Both participants understood the magnitude, yet the question lingered: who would bend and who would rise? As the gavel fell, everyone braced for the reaction that no one could predict. Judge Thomas had always commanded attention the moment he entered a room. His robe, crisp and immaculately pressed, symbolized decades of unchallenged authority. His presence alone could silence murmurs, shift postures, and bend even the most confident attorneys to the rhythm of his court. He was meticulous, relentless, and notoriously exacting, qualities that had earned him a reputation as a formidable figure in the legal world. But beneath the veneer of competence and control lay a personality hardened by ego, shaped by decades of unquestioned power, and sharpened by a career that often rewarded intimidation over fairness. Controversies had trailed him like shadows, some subtle, some explosive. There were whispers of overly harsh sentences, of dismissing cases with a flick of the gavel when a more measured approach might have revealed nuance. Lawyers spoke in hushed tones of the Thomas stare, a piercing gaze that could make even seasoned litigators question their next word. Colleagues acknowledged his brilliance but often criticized the arrogance that seemed to accompany every decision. In private chambers, he was said to be dismissive of those who lacked influence, quick to assert dominance, and slow to recognize merit beyond the circles he valued. Years of accolades and high-profile rulings had cemented his belief that he was untouchable, a belief that bordered on hubris. In the courtroom, Thomas thrived on control. He set the tempo, dictated the decorum, and often preemptively quashed challenges before they could gain momentum. His speech carried weight, his tone commanded attention, and his gavel punctuated arguments with authority rather than reasoning. Opponents were expected to respect the hierarchy. Those who challenged it were often dismissed, humiliated, or forced into procedural traps that favored his position. Many assumed that his track record, his status, and his intimidating presence would be enough to dominate any courtroom drama, regardless of the strength or integrity of the opposing counsel. Yet even the most invincible figures carry cracks unseen by the public eye. Behind the poised exterior, Thomas had underestimated the changing landscape, an America increasingly unwilling to accept arrogance cloaked as authority. He misjudged not only the courtroom's evolving dynamics, but also the growing expectation for moral courage and transparency. The legal system, once unquestioned in its hierarchy, was now under scrutiny, and his inflexible style had become a liability. Years of authority, tradition, and ritual could not prepare him for the quiet storm about to erupt in front of him. Personal ambition had long guided his decisions. Power, prestige, and legacy were constants in his calculations. While some viewed him as a paragon of discipline, others saw a man deeply entrenched in self-importance, someone who measured influence not by justice rendered but by the fear inspired. Mistakes were rare, but when they occurred, they were often downplayed or justified with a mixture of logic and intimidation. This pattern had left a trail of bruised reputations, whispered grievances, and legal victories that felt hollow to those on the receiving end. The irony was stark. Thomas had built his empire on a foundation of control, yet his inflexibility would prove to be the very chink in his armor. His assumption that power alone would subdue any challenger blinded him to the possibility of encountering someone immune to fear, immune to intimidation, someone who could meet arrogance with unwavering composure. Every precedent, every gavel strike, every courtroom drama he had orchestrated had trained him for victory, but not for a confrontation defined by moral courage, strategic brilliance, and public resonance. As he adjusted his robe, preparing for what he assumed would be another routine assertion of dominance, the audience in the courtroom, attorneys, journalists, spectators, sensed the tension. There was a palpable shift, a subtle unease that even Thomas, for all his experience, could not entirely dismiss. Something in the air hinted that his opponent was not merely another challenger. She was a force of principle and precision, one who refused to bend to intimidation, one who would expose the limits of his power if he faltered. But then came the opponent who refused to bend or break. Jasmine Crockett's story was not one written in quiet hallways or gilded offices. It was forged in the struggle of long nights spent studying law while balancing the weight of responsibility and expectation. From an early age, she had witnessed injustice in its rawest forms, families silenced by bureaucracy, communities ignored by those in power, and dreams deferred not for lack of ambition but because the system itself seemed rigged against them. These experiences shaped her, not with bitterness but with resolve. She learned that courage often comes quietly in moments when no one is watching, and that true strength is measured not by the obstacles you face but by the dignity with which you confront them. Her path into law was deliberate, a choice rooted in a desire to defend those who could not defend themselves. College and law school were rigorous, demanding every ounce of intellect and perseverance she could muster. Nights blurred into mornings as she pored over case studies, dissected precedent, and honed the analytical precision that would later define her courtroom style. Each victory she achieved early in her career was a testament not only to her knowledge, but to her relentless dedication. Her colleagues quickly recognized that she possessed a rare combination: a mind sharp enough to unravel the most intricate legal arguments and a presence calm enough to diffuse tension without ever seeming overbearing. Public service became her calling. She devoted herself to initiatives that amplified marginalized voices, representing communities often overlooked or dismissed. Her reputation grew not through flashy headlines, but through consistent, principled action. Every case she took on, every policy she influenced, carried the quiet but unmistakable stamp of integrity. People began to see her as more than a lawyer. She was a symbol of hope, a reminder that justice could be more than an abstract ideal, it could be a lived reality. Yet the journey was not without hardship. Financial strain, professional setbacks, and the subtle, persistent weight of skepticism from peers tested her resolve at every turn. There were moments when the outcome seemed uncertain, when the system itself appeared to conspire against her. But Jasmine faced each challenge with composure, viewing obstacles not as deterrents, but as opportunities to sharpen her resolve. Each setback became a lesson in strategy, patience, and foresight, equipping her with the resilience required for battles far greater than any she had previously encountered. Her courtroom demeanor reflected this preparation. Calm, measured, and deliberate, she projected authority without aggression, persuasion without arrogance. She had mastered the art of waiting, of listening, of striking with precision when the moment demanded. Witnesses and juries alike found themselves swayed not by theatrics, but by the clarity and integrity of her reasoning. It was a style that seemed effortless, but had been meticulously cultivated over years of practice and reflection. Every pause, every careful choice of words was designed to command attention, build trust, and subtly expose the vulnerabilities of those who relied solely on intimidation. When she learned of the $500 million fine imposed by Judge Thomas, there was no panic, no rush to react. Instead, Jasmine saw the moment for what it was: a stage, a test of principle and preparation, an opportunity to confront arrogance with dignity. Her mind raced through every precedent, every potential argument, and every possible response Thomas could muster. She recognized that this confrontation was more than a personal challenge. It was a reflection of broader stakes, a moment to show the nation that integrity and preparation could triumph over power and hubris. Those who knew her understood that she was uniquely equipped for this clash. Her life's journey had demanded patience, strategy, and an unyielding commitment to justice. Her career had honed her ability to remain calm under pressure, to see beyond immediate threats, and to anticipate moves before they were made. She did not simply react, she calculated, she reasoned, she prepared to deliver the kind of performance that would not merely win the case, but resonate far beyond the courtroom walls. It was this combination of personal resilience, professional skill, and moral clarity that made her a formidable force. Jasmine Crockett was not just facing a judge, she was facing an institution of power, and she was ready. Every lesson from her past, every struggle overcome, every late night spent mastering her craft converged in that courtroom, equipping her to expose arrogance and claim a moral victory that extended well beyond the $500 million figure. The courtroom buzzed. And then the debate began in earnest. The courtroom atmosphere shifted instantly as the debate began. Judge Thomas leaned forward, his voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Ms. Crockett," he said, each syllable dripping with authority, "your arguments are ambitious, but they ignore precedent. You risk overstepping the bounds of this court." His tone was both warning and challenge, a clear attempt to rattle her composure. Every eye turned toward her, expecting a crack in the calm that had defined her entrance. Jasmine Crockett's response was measured, almost serene. She didn't rise immediately. Instead, she allowed a deliberate pause, letting the weight of the judge's words settle over the room. Every word hung in the air, magnified by the silent anticipation of the crowd. The nation watched through live feeds, cameras capturing each micro-expression, and social media feeds lighting up with every reaction. Viewers tweeted rapidly, dissecting every gesture, every tone, every glance. Hashtags trended, #CrockettCome, #ThomasChallenge, #Courtroom Showdown. The digital world seemed to pulse with the energy of a live thriller, reflecting the tension in the very air of the courtroom. When she finally spoke, her words were precise, unwavering, and confident. "Your Honor," she began, her voice steady yet commanding attention. "Respect for precedent does not equate to abandoning justice. The law is not an instrument of intimidation, it is a safeguard of fairness. And it is in that spirit that I present my case." Her calmness contrasted sharply with Thomas's visible agitation. The judge's brow furrowed, a subtle but unmistakable sign that her measured approach was beginning to unsettle him. Interruptions and legal barbs escalated quickly. Thomas leaned forward repeatedly, questioning her evidence, challenging her interpretations, and attempting to assert dominance. Each interjection was designed to provoke, to test the limits of her composure. Yet Crockett responded with clarity, countering each point without aggression, with logic that exposed gaps in his reasoning. The courtroom felt electric, every word a spark in a room charged with tension. A single pause, a thoughtful gesture, a deliberate choice of phrase, each became a signal of her mastery and his growing unease. Observers in the jury and gallery felt the stakes keenly. Some whispered among themselves, their voices low but urgent, as they tried to anticipate the next move. Press photographers leaned forward, lens trained on the subtle interplay of expressions, capturing moments that would define headlines. Online commentators dissected every exchange, and the public's fascination grew by the minute. The nation seemed collectively holding its breath, aware that this was more than a legal debate. It was a confrontation between principle and authority, courage and ego. Tension mounted further as Thomas's interruptions grew sharper, his tone edged with impatience. "Ms. Crockett," he barked, "you speak of fairness, yet you disregard the weight of responsibility this court bears." The room flinched collectively. Yet Crockett remained poised, responding not with fire but with measured emphasis. She framed each rebuttal not as defiance but as illumination, showing where arrogance had clouded judgment and where power had overshadowed justice. Every point she made landed like a stone thrown into still water, ripples spreading through the audience, the press, and the online world. The clash continued, each volley raising the stakes. Thomas's agitation became more apparent, the confidence he had carried into the courtroom faltering. Crockett, in contrast, maintained a calm authority, her presence a steady counterpoint to his increasingly visible frustration. The room seemed suspended in time, every glance, pause, and gesture magnified. Social media buzzed incessantly, viewers dissecting her every argument, cheering her composure, and predicting a turning point that felt imminent. And then, in the silence, she delivered the words that would echo nationwide. Jasmine Crockett paused, her gaze sweeping across the courtroom. Every eye, every camera, every journalist held their breath, waiting for her next move. The silence was almost unbearable, heavy with anticipation. Then, with the calm precision that had defined her entire career, she began to speak, her words deliberate and unflinching. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady, resonant, commanding attention without arrogance, "we have all witnessed precedent and authority wielded as instruments of intimidation. But today, the law demands clarity, fairness, and accountability." The room leaned in. Even Judge Thomas, whose years of experience had taught him to anticipate every legal maneuver, shifted in his seat. His confident facade, honed over decades, trembled at the edges. He thought he had prepared for every scenario, every argument, every strategy, but he had not anticipated the precision, the foresight, the moral clarity of Jasmine Crockett. Every word she spoke cut through the assumptions he had relied on for years. She moved seamlessly into the evidence, presenting documents, precedents, and meticulously constructed arguments that highlighted contradictions in Thomas's reasoning. Each exhibit she introduced was not merely a legal tool, it was a calculated revelation. She exposed where the court had overlooked facts, where assumptions had been made without basis, and where authority had been confused with justice. The courtroom seemed to shrink around her, the air thick with suspense, as if the walls themselves were absorbing the weight of her truth. A single pause followed each point, letting it settle. Each pause became a mini cliffhanger, a moment for the audience, both inside the courtroom and online, to register the impact. Social media feeds erupted instantly. #Crockett strikes back, #justice served, #Thomas humiliated. Memes began circulating within minutes. Screenshots of Thomas's flustered expressions captioned with witty, biting commentary. GIFs of Crockett's calm demeanor went viral, paired with texts like "grace under fire" and "masterclass in poise." Every upload, every retweet amplified the drama unfolding in real time. Judge Thomas attempted to interject, his voice rising, carrying authority, impatience, and a hint of desperation. "Ms. Crockett, your interpretation," he began, but she cut him off without raising her voice, without disrespect, simply by holding up a document and letting it speak for itself. The clarity of the evidence rendered his interruption meaningless, his arguments crumbling under the weight of meticulously prepared facts. For the first time, the courtroom saw a crack in his armor, a visible shiver of uncertainty that betrayed his composed exterior. The audience reacted immediately. Gasps echoed across the benches, journalists scribbled notes furiously, and even the jurors seemed momentarily suspended between disbelief and admiration. Every exchange became a moment of collective revelation. People watching online were live commenting, their words a chorus of shock, and validation. "She's untouchable," one tweeted. "This is why we need leaders like her," commented another. "Thomas just got schooled in dignity and logic," someone wrote. The tweet quickly gaining hundreds of likes and shares within seconds. Crockett's counterattack was not simply a matter of words or evidence, it was a performance of principle. Each point she made systematically dismantled the judge's assumptions, his previous rulings, and the aura of untouchability he had cultivated. She highlighted inconsistencies, presented examples of overlooked context, and demonstrated with undeniable clarity the gap between authority and justice. Every revelation landed like a gavel strike, resonating through the room, magnified by the press, and immortalized on social media. The judge's attempts to recover were futile. He adjusted his robe, leaned forward, and tried to assert control, but every gesture was met with measured poise from Crockett. She maintained her rhythm, her calm authority a counterweight to his flailing attempts at dominance. The courtroom cameras captured every flicker of expression, every falter in tone, every subtle sign of his crumbling confidence. Across the nation, people replayed clips in disbelief, commenting, analyzing, celebrating her mastery. The story had transcended law and entered the realm of cultural legend. At the crescendo of her argument, she delivered the final, decisive point. It was not shouted, it was not aggressive, it was precise, undeniable, and morally undeniable. The law exists not to intimidate, but to protect. Power is meaningless without integrity. Today, we witness not the might of authority, but the triumph of justice. The courtroom erupted in stunned applause. Phones flashed, cameras clicked, and the social media feeds exploded into a storm of admiration, shock, and viral excitement. The judge's confident facade had cracked completely. The aura of invincibility he had carried into the room was gone. Even colleagues in the legal community were visibly shaken. Commentators immediately began framing the moment as a historic humiliation for Thomas, a victory for principle over power. Hashtags multiplied. #Crockett wins. #moral victory. #justice prevails. Memes ranged from witty depictions of Crockett standing firm to illustrated contrasts of composure versus arrogance, her calm elegance stark against his faltering authority. Each share amplified the moment, turning a courtroom exchange into a national conversation, a cultural touchstone. And yet, amidst the applause, the flashing cameras, and the social media frenzy, Jasmine remained composed. There was no gloating, no exaggeration, only the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. She had not merely counted authority, she had illuminated the difference between courage and arrogance, between preparation and hubris. Her message resonated far beyond the courtroom. Integrity, dignity, and perseverance could confront even the most imposing of powers. As cameras flashed and phones recorded every second, the fallout had only begun. Within hours, the courtroom drama became a global phenomenon. Social media exploded as clips of Jasmine Crockett's calm, precise takedown of Judge Thomas went viral. Every feed was filled with her poised demeanor, her carefully constructed arguments, and the moment the judge's confidence visibly faltered. #Crocketriumph and #justice prevails trended worldwide, while hashtags mocking Thomas's missteps, #Thomas stumbles, #gavel fail, #authority cracks filled timelines with relentless energy. Memes circulated almost instantly. Stills of her calm gaze contrasted with images of Thomas flinching, captions amplifying the drama, framing her as the embodiment of composure, intellect, and moral courage. News networks across the country broadcast replay after replay of the courtroom exchange. Analysts dissected her arguments, highlighting the meticulous planning that had transformed what could have been an ordinary legal proceeding into a historic humiliation of a high-profile judge. Pundits debated the ethical and legal implications, some praising her brilliance and restraint, others marveling at how one person had so dramatically shifted the narrative in real time. The conversation wasn't limited to law, it became a cultural commentary on power, arrogance, and the courage required to confront it. Celebrities joined the discourse, lending their voices to the moment. From tweets applauding her poise to Instagram stories sharing clips of her decisive counterattack, public figures amplified the story, turning the courtroom clash into a cultural touchstone. Every comment, share, and reaction added layers of validation, reinforcing her heroism and highlighting the contrast between her dignity and Thomas's faltering authority. Public perception quickly framed Crockett not only as a skilled attorney but as a symbol of principled leadership, courage under pressure, and resilience in the face of intimidation. Political figures weighed in cautiously but decisively. Opponents and supporters alike acknowledged the spectacle, with some praising her courage and others attempting to defend Thomas, framing the incident as a testament to the pressures judges face. Yet, the impact on his reputation was undeniable. Years of unchallenged authority now faced scrutiny in the court of public opinion. Editorials speculated on the long-term implications for his career, questioning the assumptions of invincibility he had carried into that courtroom. Meanwhile, Crockett's professional credibility soared. Invitations to speak, profiles in major publications, and commentary on legal strategy flooded in, cementing her as a rising force whose influence extended far beyond a single courtroom. The ripple effect spread further. Online forums debated the deeper significance of the confrontation, dissecting the moral and ethical lessons embedded in her performance. Citizens across communities, many of them long familiar with systemic injustice, felt a surge of validation and inspiration. They saw in her triumph a reflection of what was possible when preparation, courage, and integrity collided. Conversations shifted from legal minutiae to broader themes: fairness, moral authority, and the courage to stand firm against entrenched power. Even global audiences took notice. International media highlighted the moment as a case study in the clash between institutional authority and individual moral courage. Comparisons emerged to historic legal battles where principles had prevailed against power, framing Crockett as a modern embodiment of resilience and dignity. The moment transcended national boundaries, becoming a symbol of how integrity could confront arrogance anywhere in the world. The emotional resonance was immediate and profound. Ordinary citizens felt they had witnessed something historic, a real-time example of justice being served beyond the procedural formalities of the law. The applause, the social media engagement, the endless discussion all contributed to a sense of shared experience. People didn't just follow the story, they felt a part of it. Her calm authority offered a template for how dignity and preparation could confront even the most intimidating forces. Yet the most lasting impact was the shift in perception. Judge Thomas, once viewed as untouchable, now faced a permanent reminder of the vulnerability inherent in unchecked authority. Crockett's heroism, by contrast, became a benchmark, a standard of moral courage and strategic brilliance that would define public discourse for months, if not years. People began citing her courtroom victory in discussions far beyond the legal field, applying the lessons of her composure and intellect to politics, leadership, and personal empowerment. Amid the viral clips, trending hashtags, and endless commentary, one thing became clear. This was no longer just a courtroom story. It had become a cultural moment, a point of reference for courage, preparation, and the power of principle over arrogance. The public had witnessed a definitive shift, one that redefined expectations for authority figures and reaffirmed the possibility of triumph through integrity and resilience. But beyond the chaos, a deeper lesson emerged. In the end, the courtroom was empty, yet the echoes of what had transpired lingered far beyond its walls. The gavel that once symbolized unquestioned authority now seemed muted, a reminder that power alone cannot define justice. Jasmine Crockett's calm, unwavering stance had turned a legal confrontation into a lesson in dignity, courage, and the enduring value of integrity. What the world witnessed was more than a courtroom victory. It was a triumph of principle over arrogance, preparation over intimidation, and moral clarity over mere authority. For many, the spectacle was a mirror reflecting broader truths about life, leadership, and society. Arrogance, no matter how entrenched, is fragile when met with quiet confidence and well-founded conviction. Power without accountability is hollow. Authority without respect for justice crumbles under scrutiny. Crockett's performance demonstrated that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it waits, observes, and strikes precisely when the moment demands it. Every calculated pause, every measured word, every moment of composure became a beacon of moral courage, a guide for how ordinary individuals might confront their own challenges, whether personal, professional, or societal. Her victory resonated far beyond the courtroom. People saw themselves reflected in her resilience. Immigrants navigating new systems, citizens challenging entrenched hierarchies, young professionals striving to make their voices heard. Her triumph was both symbolic and instructive, a blueprint for confronting intimidation without losing one's dignity. It reminded the public that justice is not solely in statutes or rulings, it exists wherever courage, preparation, and ethical clarity converge. The narrative carried lessons in humility for those in positions of power. Judge Thomas's downfall, though public and dramatic, was not merely a spectacle of humiliation. It was a demonstration of the limits of arrogance and the consequences of underestimating those who act from principle rather than fear. The juxtaposition between his faltering authority and Crockett's composed mastery offered a profound message. Legacy and influence are defined not by intimidation, but by respect earned through integrity and moral courage. For viewers, the takeaway was both immediate and enduring. One could internalize the heroism displayed in that courtroom in everyday life, from workplace dynamics to community engagement, from personal challenges to civic participation. Standing firm, preparing meticulously, and acting with clarity and dignity are not abstract ideals, they are actionable strategies that create impact far beyond a single moment. Crockett's story encouraged audiences to recognize that moral courage is contagious, inspiring ripple effects that extend to families, communities, and even national consciousness. Even the media frenzy, the viral memes, and the trending hashtags carried a lesson. Society craves examples of principled leadership, of calm courage overcoming aggression, of intellect and ethics prevailing over ego. This collective recognition was a testament to the power of narrative, the value of example, and the enduring human desire to see justice, dignity, and integrity prevail. As the dust settled, The lesson crystallized. Life will inevitably confront each of us with moments where authority, pressure, or arrogance challenge our principles. How we respond defines not just the outcome, but the character we leave in the wake. Jasmine Crockett's composure, preparation, and unwavering commitment to justice became a living instruction, an invitation to act with courage, speak with clarity, and maintain dignity in the face of any challenge. And the story doesn't end there. It's a call to action for all of us. The courtroom drama that unfolded over the $500 million fine was more than a legal spectacle. It was a defining moment in the battle between arrogance and principle. Jasmine Crockett's calm, precise, and unwavering approach turned a tense confrontation into a masterclass of moral courage. She reminded the nation that true power lies not in intimidation or authority, but in preparation, integrity, and the courage to stand firm in the face of overwhelming odds. Every gavel strike, every pointed argument, every moment of silence was a lesson in how dignity and reason can prevail even against the most imposing figures. As viewers, we witness not just a legal victory, but a triumph of character. Crockett's performance reverberated across social media, news outlets, and conversations nationwide, inspiring countless people to reflect on their own challenges and the ways they confront authority, injustice, or doubt. The story offered a blueprint: remain composed under pressure, prepare thoroughly, and never compromise your principles. These are the tools that turn adversity into opportunity and moral clarity into cultural impact. Now, the moment extends beyond the courtroom. This story is a reminder that each of us can channel courage, resilience, and strategic thinking into our own lives. Stand up when it matters, stay calm when challenged, and act with integrity even when the stakes feel insurmountable. If this story inspired you, share it with others who need a reminder of what courage and principle can achieve. Subscribe to join a community that celebrates truth, dignity, and the power of standing firm. Comment below with the moments where you faced your own trials and triumphed through calm determination. Together, we amplify the message. Stand up, stay calm, and never underestimate the power of truth.